Chapter 19. Pinocchio is robbed of his money. Pinocchio is robbed of his money, and as a punishment, he is sent to prison for 4 months. The puppet returns to the town and begins to count the minutes one by one. And when he thinks that it must be time, he takes the road leading to the field of miracles. And as he walks along with hurried steps, his heart beats fast, tick-tock, tick-tock, like a drawing room clock when it is really going well. Meanwhile, he's thinking to himself, and if instead of 1,000 gold pieces I find on the branches of the tree 2,000, and instead of 2,000, supposing I find 5,000, and instead of 5,000 I find 100,000. Oh, what a fine gentleman I should then become! I would have a beautiful palace, 1,000 little wooden horses, and 1,000 stables to amuse myself with, a cellar full of currant wine and sweet syrups, and a library quite full of candies, tarts, plum cakes, macaroons, and biscuits with cream. Whilst he's building these castles in the air, he arrives in the neighborhood of the field, and he stops to look about for a tree with its branches laden with money. But he sees nothing. He advances another 100 steps, nothing. He enters the field and goes right up to the little hole where he has buried his sovereigns, and nothing. And then becomes very thoughtful. And forgetting the rules of society and good manners, he takes his hands out of his pocket and gives his head a long scratch. To beat, זה לפעום. Drawing room, זה טרקלין. salon. A stable, זה עורבה. Current זה דמדמנית. tart זה עוגת פירות. macaroon זה עוגיה שלא מכילה קמח. macaroon. whilst זה בעוד ש. A neighborhood זה שכנות, סביבה. A branch זה ענף. laden זה עמוס, טעון. To lade זה להעמיס. To bury זה לקבור. Scratch זה גירות, שריטה. Sovereign זה מלך, sovereign, או מטבע של 20 שילינג. Palace זה ארמון. Cellar זה מרתף. Syrup זה סירופ. Wine זה יין. Plum זה שזיף. Castle זה טירה, מבצר. Hole זה חור. Pocket זה כיס. Thoughtful זה רציני, מלא מחשבות. At that moment he hears an explosion of laughter close to him, and looking up he sees a large parrot perched on a tree, who was pruning the few feathers he had left. "What are you laughing at?" asks Pinocchio in an angry voice. "I'm laughing because in pruning my feathers I tickled myself under my wings." The puppet does not answer, but goes to the canal, and filling the same old shoe full of water, he proceeds to water the earth afresh that covers his gold pieces. While he is thus occupied, another laugh, still more impertinent than the first, rings out in the silence of that solitary place. "Once for all," shouts Pinocchio in a rage, "may I know, you ill-educated parrot, what are you laughing at?" "I am laughing at those simpletons who believe in all the foolish things that are told them, and who allow themselves to be entrapped by those who are more cunning than they are." "Are you perhaps speaking of me?" "Yes, I am speaking of you, poor Pinocchio, of you who are simple enough to believe that money can be sown and gathered in the fields in the same way as beans and gourds. I also believed it once, and today I am suffering for it. Today, but it is too late. I have at last learned that to put a few pennies honestly together, it is necessary to know how to earn them, either by work of our own hands or by the cleverness of our own brains." Parrot זה תוכי. To perch זה לשבת על ענף. To prune זה לזמור, לקצץ, לגזום. To tickle זה לדקדק. Canal זה תעלה. To proceed זה להמשיך. afresh מחדש. To occupy זה להעסיק. Impertinent זה חצוף. Solitary זה בודד. A feather זה נוצה. A shoe זה נעל. A rage זה זעם. Simpleton זה שוטה, petty. To entrap זה לפתות, ללקות בפח. cunning זה ערמומי, פיקח. simple זה תמים, תם. to sow זה לזרוע. to gather זה לאסוף. bean זה השעועית. good זה דלעת. cleverness זה תבונה, חריפות. to earn זה להרוויח. brain זה מוח. I don't understand you, says the puppet, who is already trembling with fear. Have patience, I will explain myself better, rejoins the parrot. You must know, then, that while you were in the town, the fox and the cat returned to the field, they took the buried money and then fled like the wind. And now, he that catches them will be clever. Pinocchio remains with his mouth open, and not choosing to believe the parrot's words, he begins with his hands and nails to dig up the earth that he has watered. And he digs, and he digs, and he digs, and makes such a deep hole that a rick of straw might have stood upright in it. But the money is no longer there. He rushes back to the town in a state of desperation and goes at once to the courts of justice to denounce the two knaves who had robbed him to the judge. The judge is a big ape of the gorilla tribe, an old ape respectable for his age, his white beard, but especially for his gold spectacles without glasses that he was always obliged to wear on account of an inflammation of the eyes that had tormented him for many years. Pinocchio relates in the presence of the judge all the particulars of the infamous fraud of which he had been the victim. He gives the names, the surnames, and other details of the two rascals and ends by demanding justice. The judge listens with great benignity, takes a lovely interest in the story, is much touched and moved, and when the puppet has nothing further to say, he stretches out his hand and rings a bell. A rick זה ערימה, a straw זה קש, to flee זה לברוח, clever זה חכם, שנון. A rick of straw זה ערימת קש, upright זה זקוף, desperation is ייאוש, to denounce זה להוקיע, knave זה רמאי, to relate זה לספר, infamous זה הידוע לשמצה, rascal זה נבל, benignity זה נדיבות, to rob זה לשדוד, respectable זה מכובד, ape זה קוף, tribe זה שבט, spectacles זה משקפיים, glasses זה משקפיים או עדשות, to oblige זה להכריח, inflammation זה דלקת, to torment זה לייסר, particulars זה פרטים, fraud זה מרמה, justice זה צדק, to stretch זה למתוח. At this summons, two mastiffs immediately appear dressed as gendarmes. The judge then, pointing to Pinocchio, says to them, "That poor devil has been robbed of 4 gold pieces. Take him away and put him immediately into prison." The puppet is petrified on hearing this unexpected sentence and tries to protest, but the gendarme, to avoid losing time, stopped his mouth and carried him off to the lockup. And there he remained for 4 months. 4 long months, and he would have remained longer still if a fortunate chance had not released him. The young emperor, who rides over the town of Trap for blockheads, having won a splendid victory over his enemies, orders great public rejoicings. There are illuminations, fireworks, horse races, and velocipede races. And as a further sign of triumph, he commands that the prisons should be opened and all the prisoners freed. If the others are to be let out of prison, I will go also, says Pinocchio to the jailer. No, not you, says the jailer, because you do not belong to the fortunate class. I beg your pardon, replies Pinocchio, I'm also a criminal. In that case, you are perfectly right, says the jailer, and taking off his hat and bowing to him respectfully, he opens the prison doors and lets him escape. New words. Summons, זימון, mastiff זה כלב שמירה אנגלי, gendarme זה שוטר, devil זה שטן, שד, to petrify זה להיבהל, to avoid להימנע, lock up זה בית כלא, צינוק, blockhead זה טיפש, rejoicing זה שמחה, to rejoice זה לשמוח, לעלוז, לגיל, illumination זה תאורה, קישוט. fireworks זה זיקוקים. a bell זה פעמון. velocipede, אופניים. תלת אופן. a race זה מרוץ. to free זה לשחרר. a criminal זה פושע. jailer זה מפקח בית הסוהר. to bow להשתחוות. a prison זה בית סוהר. an escape זה מפלט, בריחה. to escape זה לברוח. to protest זה למחות או למחוא. מהמילה מחאה. to release זה לשחרר. to ride זה למשול, למלוך. sentence זה פסק דין. End of chapter 19.